Hey, U.S. Sister students, it's Mr. Baker again. This is Baker's Corner. We're actually going to start off today by looking at our second major theme of the Roaring Twenties, and that is the theme of economy and particularly the technology development that happens and some of the after effects of it. So let's go ahead and get to it. I have a quick question for all of you, and that this is actually something I did in some research a few years ago. So I want you to try to pretend that you're living in 1900 and somebody were to ask you, for those of you that are students, you probably have chores and things. What was the most hated um, chore or household thing that you would have to do back then? What do you think people would say? And the answer, according to this study, is laundry. Okay. And a lot of you guys, if you do your own laundry, you're like, okay, maybe we still complain about it. We're like, oh, we have to take it out of the dryer. We have to fold it. It takes time to do that. But guys, at the end of the day, what does the bulk of the work? It's going to be machines that are operated by what? Electricity, right? So a couple of trends that we notice that are kind of interesting is that by 1930, about 2/3 of American homes are going to have electricity. And what does that mean? It means that they're going to have access to the ability to buy products that are driven by, you guessed it, electricity. Okay, so what do we notice as we look at this 1920s time period, economically and technologically? We see a lot of cool, neat, rad, whatever word you want to use. It's hip in the modern day of teenagers. The idea of a lot of these new pieces of technology that are going to have not just an effect on the 20s, guys, but our lives. Think about it. Every time that you take out your phone to take a picture, all right, I know you're like, whoa, I can take it with my phone or whatever. But guys, these things are getting started and continuing to be innovated along the lines. Okay. So you can pause your screen if you want to, but all of these things are going to start to become more what people call electrified. Okay. Um, so you're noticing, the movie camera, sewing machines, Kodak cameras, those are more batteries, but you get the point. And then you'll notice, guys, even the importance of the first in flight, the Wright brothers, famous, for their famous voyage, or not voyage, excuse me, their famous flight. And then, guys, a lot of you are like, well, okay, Mr. Baker, these mail order catalogs, what does that mean? Well, guys, imagine that you're these companies, Sears and Roebuck, all these, companies that are now stores you're trying to produce and also particularly sell products. You still have a sizable piece of the puzzle of American population that live outside the boundaries of cities. Now, it just so happened in 1920, and this is a social trend as well, but it relates to really the expansion of cars and things like that. You notice that that is the first census, to my knowledge, where over half of the American population are going to be living in urban centers or urban places. Okay. So there's still a sizable portion that are still living outside, the towns or the cities, pardon me. And that's going to be what mail order catalogs allow these companies or these stores to do. You can send out your things. There's a thing that was called rural free delivery, and they would actually deliver them. If you ever get things in the mailbox that are from companies and stores, that's a very similar kind of thing. Okay. And so what do we notice, guys, moving forward? We notice that you cannot talk about the 1920s unless you also talk about it becoming more of a mobile culture. And that, of course, plays a role with the emergence, pardon me, of Henry Ford. What comes to mind when most of you think of Henry Ford? Is it the Mustang? Is it, maybe a truck? Is it maybe another kind of automobile that they produce, maybe an Explorer, something along those lines? Okay. Well, guys, Henry Ford is going to be a really instrumental force with not just cars, but just the idea of the economy of the 1920s. Now, he does not do this overnight. So he's going to really take a lot of things that are developing, and he's going to take a lot of business approaches, and he's going to make a lot of decisions that benefit his workers, but also the people that consume his products. Okay. So a couple of things about this time period. Remember, guys, you don't have a federal minimum wage. So a lot of you guys are looking at my screen and you're thinking, man, Mr. Baker, $5 a day Minimum wage now is even $7.25 an hour. Okay, believe that's the case. Guys, you got to remember this is 1910ish, 1920 moving forward. Okay, Henry Ford made it a point to try to pay his workers what you and I today would have called a fair wage. All right, this was considered to be well above what a lot of people would have considered to be similar to minimum wage. So it's a good wage, guys. It's a living wage. Now the work, as we'll see here in a second with the assembly line example, you can say, well, Mr. Baker, you're doing the same thing over and over. So you're kind of making it to where, people are doing the same monotonous task, which is kind of true. But guys, I want you to think about the big picture. What does producing things on this assembly line allow you to do? It allows you to make it more efficient. And if you make production more efficient, what is usually going to happen to cost? It's going to go down. Now, a good business person is going to give higher wages to his workers, which is what Henry Ford did. So that's a feather or check in his cap, guys. But what's the other thing that it's going to allow you to do if you're also a good business person and you care about your consumers that buy your products? It's going to make you be able to pass your savings on to them. Okay, if you take a look here, guys, you'll notice this advertisement at the far right here. This is actually a middle of the road cost for a Ford. I read another story one other time that because of the production being so efficient, they were able to get that number down into the $300 range. Okay, so it's like, okay, I want to make money, right? I'm a business person, but I also want to be in a position to be able to make it to where the middle class Americans that are going to be making more money in the 20s, but there's still a widening gap, or at least a gap between the rich and the poor. And here's another thing, guys. Think about what this concept here alludes to. The worker as a consumer. Okay, so what happens? So I'm a business person like Ford. I pay you. What do I want you to be able to do? First of all, to have pride in the product that you make. The Model T Tin Lizzie, you can see the picture up there. All right, a lot of you are like, Mr. Baker, it's not really as cool compared to cars today. If you had one of those, you're talking about priceless, a lot of money, it's valuable. Okay, but why is it important to keep in mind? His goal was to not just have people like you and I that were not his workers buy his stuff, but he wanted the workers to be in a financial position where they could actually invest into it. Why does that benefit Ford? You're taking money that you're making, you're paying your employees, and then they're then recycling it back into your company. Okay, so it's kind of a win-win for both sides. Okay, especially Ford, right? Because he's actually making money off of both sides. Okay, so anyway, kind of important. The assembly line, guys, keep in mind, was not introduced by Ford. We need to understand that. It was actually kind of perfected by Ford. It was actually Frederick W. Taylor, I think it was, that created this system or something like it. Every so often, you'll come across terms like Taylorism, etc. Okay, but guys, as you can see here, what Ford did, and again, I think this was pretty much ingenious, is Ford was like, okay, well, what is our goal? Our goal is to produce good, solid vehicles that we can stand behind and basically be able to sell them at an affordable price. And so what does this do? It allows you, as you can see here, guys, to go through this process, and you can pause it if you want to, that eventually puts the company in position to, again, be very efficient with their production and to be able to reduce cost and hopefully pass it along to their consumers and, of course, their workers as well. Okay. Detroit, Michigan, guys, as a lot of you guys have heard of. A lot of times you'll hear that referred to as Motor City. And a lot of that goes back to this. Okay. Keep an eye on, there has been some moving around of the auto industry since then, but it's something to definitely keep in the back of our minds. Okay. So one of the last things before I show you a real quick couple of examples, guys, is the America's changing economy. Okay. Now, we've already talked about consumerism, but guys, when you're talking about consumerism, essentially the nuts and bolts of it is an economy where the idea of buying goods Not necessarily food and stuff like that, although certainly that's a part of the economy, but you're talking about the things that we like to have access to. This could be anything from a new phone, in other words, items that possibly and definitely in most cases make life easier. You're basically having people buy those kinds of products. Now, couple of things to keep in mind that are cause and effect here. All right. So the cause is you've got this continued rise of consumerism. You've got these new inventions that people are going to be wanting to have access to for reasons that we looked at. They look at them in magazines, they see advertisements, etc. Okay. Now we have the rise of, you guessed it, department stores and important stores. Macy's, Marshall Fields, Sears and Roebuck. All right. Most of those you probably have at least heard of, especially Sears. Okay. And so, guys, the issue is, though, you got to remember this is that, I heard one historian put it like this, that in this time period, we're noticing overproduction rather than what we associate with, or surplus, pardon me, rather than shortage. Okay. And so the question is, all right, if you have a lot of things that you're making, people are working, you're overproducing, which is going to be a big thing that happens in the 20s that is not really the best, but it does happen. Okay. The issue is, guys, how do you get people that maybe don't have, the money in their bank account to buy an electric iron, a toaster, maybe something like a washing machine, a dryer, a vacuum, the list goes on, something that is consumer product. How do you get them to actually invest and buy it if they don't always have the money in their bank account? Well, these two things here are pretty much the way that were very common. Easy credit and also installment plans. Okay. So easy credit would be, you go, you get a loan, you're going to basically be paying on this over the course of time. Okay. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, Mr. Baker, when I think of that, I think of the credit card. The credit card is going to become more common when we look at post-World War II. So there is a connection there. Okay. But the credit card is going to really kind of take off to an extent in the later 40s, early 50s, et cetera. All right. So we're a ways off from that, but the principle is still the same. You pay back at a later time. Okay. The installment plans, a lot of you guys, if you're familiar with the word installment, means paying over time. You're looking at the idea of, let's say you want to buy a toaster, it's $10. Let's say you only have two, you want to buy some other stuff too. You have to take out a easy credit for $8. Over the course of that year or two, you're going to have to pay interest, and they're going to give you a certain amount that you pay per month for that particular item. That's installments. So for 12 months, you're going to pay 80 cents a month. Okay. And a lot of you are like, well, Mr. Baker, that's really not much money. But you got to remember, we're still talking about 1920s. Okay. Sears and Roebuck, we'll come back to you here in just a moment because I have a fun little website I'm going to show you about how, guys, if you've ever heard people say you could literally buy just about anything at Sears, there is a strong case to be made that is accurate. Okay. So why do people want all this technology? They want to make life easier for a lot of them. Okay. And so those stores become very, shall we say, valuable. How does this affect the American economy? Well, guys, check this out. You can pause it if you want to take a look at this. The big issue from 1920 to 1940, which again, guys, remember what we said in our previous lesson. We're looking at post-World War I, and we're looking at a lot of events between the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and then, of course, as you can see there, America about ready to head into our eventual declaration of World War II. Okay, so what trends are noticeable? Okay, well, take a look at this. A lot of you guys are like, well, Mr. Baker, the Roaring Twenties, is it right to think that the economy after World War I is going to immediately take off? And as you can see here, the answer is no. My question to you all, guys, why would that be the case? Think about what has to happen when you have an economy that goes from a state of war to a reconversion, right? Which is basically you're changing the kind of like the nature, okay, of a wartime economy to one that's more peacetime. Okay, well, it's going to take transition. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. Okay. So you go from an economy, guys, that's producing a lot of war goods to one that's producing a lot of consumer goods. All right. I don't know of a lot of people that are going out and buying, a lot of war things, but we are going to want to buy things like the electric toaster and things like that. So, guys, if you take a look here, you'll notice that the GDP is going to go up quite a bit. As you can see, it's a pretty strong amount of increase between 1921, 1922, and as you can see here, around 1929. Now, we won't say much about this today, but what happens in 1929? You guessed it. It is going to be the stock market crash. So that's why you see a pretty significant change moving into the 1930s. And you'll notice some change and then kind of a little bit of retraction. All right, but that's a lesson for later. Okay. Some other trends to keep in mind. You're welcome to pause your screen. Disparity between the rich and the poor. The Jones family still getting rich. The folks that are not the Joneses are not, as the saying goes. Guys, little statistic here: 1% of the American population made $10,000 or more. 65% made less than $2,000. Okay. Keep in mind, John D. Rockefeller, the famous oil tycoon, is still alive until 1937, I believe it was when he passed away. All right. So you still have those people that are making a lot of money. Okay. So some businesses grew than others. Okay. You see that a lot with different phases with technology change and things like that. And then also, guys, keep in mind agriculture. Now, remember, this goes back to World War I when we have overproduction. And a lot of your farmers are not going to adjust to a lot of the things that we associate, guys, with the idea of production. And so they're going to be overproducing, which drives their prices down. Okay. So what do we notice, guys, as far as the big business boom? Just a couple of things here. We'll look at advertising a little bit more on the next slide. Higher wages, people are making more money. Think Henry Ford's $5 a day policy, etc. Clever advertising. I want you guys to just think for a moment before we look at this on the next slide. What makes advertising clever? If you've ever seen commercials, especially the ones that cost, what is it, like $3 or $4 million for 30 seconds during the Super Bowl, there's usually something, guys, that clever advertising does to draw in the consumer's eye or attention. Okay. And a lot of those trends and a lot of those techniques really get started in the 1920s. Okay. New technology. And then, like we said a moment ago, consumer credit. I don't have it in my bank account. I'll just pay for it later or over the course of time. Okay. All right. So how much of our economy was heavily centered around the idea of consumerism, the idea of installment plans to buy products, and also how much of it was driven by the idea of new advertising techniques? Guys, check this out. 60% of cars, 70% of furniture, 80% of vacuums, and 90% of washing machines were bought using installment plans. All right, so paying over time. So a sizable portion of our population got very used to the idea of easy credit and paying for it in the long term. Okay. And a lot of them are like thinking, well, this wealth is going to be continuous. Unfortunately, that was not the reality of the day. Okay. So the question is, guys, how did these advertising techniques that were clever, how did they change? Right? Well, first of all, how the product could enhance the consumer's image. What does that mean? Okay. I know when I was a kid, I bought my mom, I should say, bought me my first pair of Air Jordan sneakers back in 1985, 1986, whenever it was. Guys, you see the commercials for Michael Jordan sneakers, and what comes to your mind? If I wear these shoes, I'm going to look cool. Look, the second thing appeals to the emotions of a buyer. In other words, I wear Air Jordan sneakers, I can jump out of the gym and slam dunk a basketball. All right. Or I got to have this. I'm going to look cool, nice, pretty. Okay. That could be anything from a car that you buy to something else. Okay. And then thirdly, guys, and this is big, you see this all the time, attach product to celebrities. Okay. So these are a couple of actually a few, I should say, guys, of the major 20 celebrities. Not all of them. You can pause if you want to. Lindbergh, he was probably, guys, one of the more well-known heroes of this time period. We're going to look at him a little bit more in one of our lessons on social influence. Okay. Amelia Earhart, the first woman to swim the English Channel. Okay. I'm sorry, the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Excuse me. After Lindbergh did it. Pardon me, there, guys. Jim Thorpe, one of the best pure athletes of his day. Those of you that have heard of Bo Jackson, in the 1980s and early 90s, played basketball. I'm sorry, baseball, played football. There's an argument, guys, that Jim Thorpe was the same way. He could have laced up probably any pair of sneakers, cleats, running shoes, whatever word you want to use, basketball shoes, and he would have automatically been an all-star. He had that kind of talent. Okay. You can't throw out music either. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, we're at the jazz age. Georgia O'Keeffe with art. And then also, guys, the idea of some of the literary figures of the time period that were associated with the Lost Generation, F. John Scott Fitzgerald. And then also one of my favorite genres, Langston Hughes with the Harlem Renaissance. Okay. And so I want to show you really quick this reference to the Sears website. Okay. So take a look, guys, at this website. So remember what I said to you a moment ago. We'll end with this, just a little bit of food for thought before you do your little project for your work day. Okay. But guys, remember what I said a moment ago. You could buy just about anything from Sears. Okay. They had catalogs. They had all these different things. Okay. Well, guys, the one thing that I tell students, and a lot of them do not really believe me until they see it for themselves, is that you could literally buy a home from Sears. Guys, this is 100% true. Okay. Now, this was, as you can see, a limited time period. So you're not going to be able to go into Sears now and buy them. But every so often, when you see homes for sale that are in like historic districts of cities and towns and things, you will come across what are called Sears Craftsman homes. Okay. And that is exactly the way that it sounds. So you could actually get Sears to help you build your house. Now, you can do this on your own. If you type in like searsarchives.com/homes, but I'm just going to show you a couple of fun examples. I'm going to go to this one just out of curiosity. And guys, you'll notice all these different home styles, structures, things like that, different costs. These are actually in that day's cost. Okay. So if you take a look, guys, you'll notice, we're just going to look at the Hill Rose really quick. Okay. You'll notice here, guys, that again, $1,585 is going to buy you a pretty nice house. I think it's safe to say, right? Let me move my face over so you can actually see, hopefully, my picture here, guys, or the picture. Okay, doesn't look like that's working. Okay, sorry about that. But anyway, but very cool. And you could actually buy these on installment plans. You notice here, guys, this looks like a form of the Ford Model T. Okay. So anyway, I didn't do that because I knew that was there. It was just, kind of a cool little coincidence. Okay. But it's something to definitely keep in the back of your mind. Okay. So I want to leave you guys with one thought about this 1920s, roaring 20s economy with consumerism, installment plans, new technology before we sign off, and we'll move on to our next installment next time. But I want to ask yourself the question, guys, and this is, I think, applicable now as much as it is then. Do you all think that the emergence of this new technology changes the nature of wants and also what we associate with needs? Think about that, and maybe we'll talk about it in class sometime. As always, hope you had a great lesson. I know that I did. Very neat to study all these different trends, and hopefully, guys, you're thinking about the way that your chores have changed for your lives just because of the 1920s and other things. But as always, feel free to email me at bakerd@franklinmcademy.org. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you at our next installment, and have a good one. Stay safe and take care. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.